Thank you, Kevin. My name is Jane Griffin, and I am an alcoholic. I usually introduce myself. I'm an alcoholic. My name is Jane because a woman that I just idolize. That's how she introduced herself, and I made it a habit. I would like to thank Elizabeth for asking me to share, and Kevin, thank you for your service, and whoever else does service on this meeting. Welcome if you're new. If you don't hear anything tonight that I say that makes you want to go back to another meeting, go to another meeting and you will hear your story eventually. I don't speak for AA. I'm not an authority on Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not an authority on the steps. I'm certainly not an authority on God or how this thing works. And whatever you consider your higher power, it was just easier for me to call it God. No slight to people that have and get something out of religion, but I'm not a religious person. So tonight it's just my job. It's my turn to tell you in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. I have two what happens, and they're pretty significant and they're pretty amazing. I started drinking alcoholically in Michigan, where I grew up, at the age of 10. My sister, who's 11 months and 3 weeks older than me, and she has 28 years sober, she started smoking at 8. My sobriety date is June 14th, 1989. So I, last June, celebrated 34 years. Prior to that, from 10 to 19, it was a lot of psychiatrists. It was, my mom drank the way that a lot of us do, but we're told that we cannot claim somebody else has a disease. I have not walked in my mother's shoes. And I used to blame everything on my mom. She told the psychiatrists that her divorce from my dad was too much for me to handle. I just got back from a week in Savannah, Georgia. My mom has alcoholic dementia. She's about to turn 91. And I've never seen my mother scared and not in complete control. So everything that I thought I knew about my mom ended when I spent that week there. I'm so grateful. It was a lot easier to tell my story when I could blame other people, but alcoholism happens. It doesn't, God doesn't necessarily call the, what is the saying? God calls the willing. He doesn't always call the able. So whatever was going on in my household that I felt so desperately alone and raw and an open walking wound was evidenced by going to school. I would go to school and there were 3 girls in my middle school and then high school, Peggy Schmidt, Debbie Johnston, and Carol Kelly. I say their full names because they're not one of us. And I ping-ponged between those 3 girls. They were the most popular girls, so they didn't hang out together. They had their own little posses. And I, from a very young age, would try to pretzel myself into being what each of them needed, hoping that one of them didn't see me talking to the other ones. I was such a puppet. I was so desperately wanting to be part of, and I wasn't. My sister and I rode competitively hunter jumper horses, so we didn't have after school. We went right from school to horseback riding lessons. On the weekends, we were at horse shows. So those little opportunities that a lot of kids have, not everybody, but a lot of kids have, of getting in arguments, figuring out how to make, get back together. You have your first little boyfriends, you have your heart broken. I didn't go through those things until I got sober. And it's very unlovely on somebody 28 years old, but you get here the way you get here. And so by the time I was 19, I was seeing a psychiatrist that had suggested that I might have a problem with alcohol. And that was not news to me. I was a blackout drinker from day one. My childhood, my biggest memory is all those kids that hurt me. I had 3 little Sears mirrors that I lined up against the wall in our basement. And I had a microphone stand and a record player. I didn't have a microphone. And I had my 3 favorite albums, Steppenwolf, Partridge Family, and Led Zeppelin 2. And I would give concerts and I would drink as much as I could. I was a latchkey kid. Mom was in the same school system as my sister and I. And I would go down to the basement with just as much booze in me as I could. And it was the only time I really felt okay about myself, because I was punishing you all you kids that didn't say hi to me and had a life of your own that I didn't know about. I thought the world revolved around me. You were all watching me and I was the star. And I felt so good when I did that. And when I was 28, right before I was arrested for felony and drunk driving and left my 2.5-year-old son in a 2nd-story apartment, I was giving a concert in my living room. It had progressed. I had a beautiful round peach colored mirror, and I would take all my clothes out of the closet and I would do outfits and shows. And I did this all by myself, mostly because my blackout drinking wasn't pretty. Women certainly didn't want me around because all men were fair game. I've always had difficulty making friends with women. It's a lot made up in my head. It's an old belief, but I went with it. And my mom, being the wonderful, loving person that she was, a counselor, then a vice principal in the middle school that filed into ours, all I had to do was tell her, what somebody had done to me. Debbie Johnston is mad because of blah, blah, blah. And she'd say, buy her a diamond sapphire ring and she'll forgive you. And that's how I learned how to make friends. You buy them, you lie, you say whatever you have to have them on your side. And I'm telling you, it felt like my alternative was death. I've heard people say that alcohol was their medicine, it was the solution. It was to my painful belief that none of you understood how I felt. None of you have rejection the way I did. None of you were a raw nerve like I was. All of you had somebody to talk to, and the world made sense. So I lived in this little make-believe world in my basement, whatever I was doing, from 10 to 19. And, that's 5th grade. When I remember when I saw my son in 5th grade, and I thought, wow. I was grateful for alcohol because my sister found drugs. Her first boyfriend was a pharmacist's son. And she had 6 suicide attempts before she got sober. And we were raised to not depend on each other. My mom didn't want to be ganged up on. And I don't blame her. I used to really judge that she scarred us. And when I put myself in her place, my son is 37 now, and he's coming up on 16 years sober in a couple of weeks. Yes, we have alcoholism in my family. I really started to understand that the alcoholic brain, my alcoholic brain, is a negative fault-finding mind. I am grandiose and I'm an infant at the same time. I am not able to handle frustration and I'm extremely immature. I didn't come up with those terms, but Bill Wilson's and Marty Mann's psychiatrist did, Harry Tebow. Wrote a little book on it. It's in the A Comes of Age. He's in the appendix of the big book. He's on page 123 of the 12 and 12, not by name, but he shares with Dr. Silkworth that solution. 2 non-alcoholics found the solution for alcoholism, but they couldn't put it together. I believe it was Freud that coined King Baby, and Jung also carried on with that work. They got the psychological part of the disease, and Dr. Silkworth got the medical part of the disease, that we had this allergy, and that once we started drinking, we couldn't stop, and that we had a spiritual malady. But they couldn't put it together until Bill and Bob got together, and it was one alcoholic talking to another. That's where it was born that Harry Tebow was so humble that he wrote a little booklet to other psychiatrists on why he felt he was failing alcoholics, why a non-alcoholic couldn't tell an alcoholic how to get better. Well, I don't know about you, but this alcoholic does not like to be told no. I do not like to be told how to do things, and I do not like to be talked down to. Do not slow me down. My mind works very, very fast. I have the answer for everything. I have arrogance. I have low self-esteem. I don't know who I am on the inside. And until I went through 4 treatment centers and in 1989 was arrested for felony hit and run drunk driving, I had, for the first time in my life, I had a purpose. And my son was my purpose. I was not going to let my son grow up in a household that I was raised in. And he was the reason that I came to AA. The woman that was my first sponsor had a son the same age. It was a totally different experience because of Jack. I told who was to become my husband, his name is Archie. He's not one of us. He did not know what he was getting into. His mother begged him not to marry an alcoholic, but he did. I thank him every year. I thank his wife of 32 years. Thank you every year that God found it, that Archie would be a dumbass long enough to marry me, have a child with me. And then alcoholism came right back in and I was off and running and I didn't want to be married anymore. And it was sort of a repeat of my childhood. He had to save himself and there was no way I was going to stay married because being married and having a baby really interferes with your drinking. So I told Archie something that shocked me. I told him in 1989 when I went into that treatment center that if I drank again, he could have custody of Jack. And for the first time, I knew what unconditional love was. And I knew what and why my life had to matter. That if I did not have sobriety, I could not be a mother. And if I could not be a mother, God knew that I wasn't going to be able to live with myself. And I put that kid's life in danger for several years, obviously. He was 2.5 when I got sober. He was in blackout drives with me. I had a very brief drug story. I did, they call it crank at the time. And I had a friend who also dealt cocaine, never used it himself, but I would take Jack in a blackout in the car with me to get drugs. I would stay up all night, for 3 nights in a row. And my little baby would, when he learned to walk, would try and come over to get comforted. And I had my last nerve and I would scream at that child. And he didn't start talking till he was 2.5. I found that out because a member of this program who was sober a long time was his teacher. And he saw alcoholism through my son in me, that something had to be going on in this son's home life. So when I got out of treatment that time, I was really lucky. I did geographics. I tried to get sober. I went through treatment centers in several different states and went to meetings, 1 or 2 here and there in several different states. You guys did something weird. You gave us your phone number. I didn't want women's phone numbers. I didn't want women friends. My mom, not meaning to be mean, told me that because I was attractive, I would never have women friends. And I just chose to believe that. It was easier. What ended up being the truth is I was talking to your men. That's why women didn't want to be friends with me. I was flirting with your men. I was riding motorcycles with your men. And I got along better with men. And I found that out in sobriety. And that changed. I would hear that thing about, the men will pat your ass and the women will save your ass. And that's absolutely the truth. It has been so for me. Not every man. In fact, when I first got sober, I was sentenced to work at our local Alano club. And I got to know a lot of the men there. And they saw a deer in the headlights gal that did not have any maturity. And I had a little group of guys that kind of surrounded me and protected me. They didn't hit on me. They didn't make me feel creepy. And they kept, pushing me to the women that were doing this deal. And that's how I got introduced to the women that were really serious about staying sober in Marin County. They talked about steps. They talked about application. They talked about God. They talked about where your dependence is. They talked about a routine. They talked about all the things that it took to stay sober. They also insisted on having fun. We had sober softball. We had dances. And just like in high school, the girls would dance together and the guys would just kind of watch. And, but we socialized. So, you know, all of my 20s, my 30s, my 40s were all taken up in very involved in AA. I always had a commitment the first 20 years. I never left Marin, even though I couldn't afford to live here, because I was scared. And I think justly so. I had tried to get sober in so many different places, not a serious attempt the way we do now, the way I do now, but I thought by osmosis or by meetings or by being given, you know, reading the big book, that I would just be able to apply it to my life. And I had that thing in me of, you can't tell me anything. I already knew I was an alcoholic for 10 years before I got here. I already had a God in my life, and I didn't know that meant I had a closed mind to what God was capable of doing, but I didn't want to hear about God because I didn't have a problem. And it was explained to me that the third step was merely making a decision. And who can't make a decision? I did not want the consequences of drinking, but I didn't necessarily want to give up drinking. And that seemed to be one of the things that they wanted you to do was, can you stop drinking long to at least give an honest effort to these steps? So by the fourth time around and having a kid, I got really excited. I got involved in the Marin County Fellowship. I got involved in the women's conference. I got involved in going to international conventions. I was on fire for AA. I was just on fire. I sponsored whoever asked. Oh, no, that's actually not true. A couple people told me I did say no, but I did service. I had a full-time job. I had a full-time job as a parent, even though my husband did his fair share. He did half and half, but my son ended up living with me when school age came, and I had a full-time meeting schedule. I was handed a meeting schedule when I got here. I wasn't asked what I wanted to do here. I was told based on my experience, I was not going to stay sober. That got my attention. That bitch was not going to tell me that I could not get sober. She said, but Jane, you come around and you say all the right stuff. You've learned, you've memorized the language. You talk in every freaking meeting. Can you not talk? I don't think you can. And you seem to have an answer for everything, yet you're the one who keeps going back out and drinking. So by my estimate, I don't see anything here that's any different. And my eyes welled up with tears. And I looked at her and I said, oh my God. That's pretty much all I said, because I was not about to tell her she was right. And I think in spite, out of spite, God knows me so well, I jumped in with both feet. She worked for herself. And she said, for those people that want it, you can't beat them away with a stick. For those that want it, you can't give it away. So she said, you can go anywhere I am. You are unemployable. If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, then there are things that you have to do. Yeah, they call it suggestions, but how has it ever worked for you when something was suggested? Not so well. I made a little comment before the meeting. I heard it from somebody else that for a long time, without knowing it, I worked Jane's Anonymous. Anything that was unpalatable to me, I could compartmentalize and kind of act like, well, I'm not drinking. Don't we all just come here for that? Even though everywhere in the literature it says, why not apply to the rest of my life that which I applied to my alcohol problem? I didn't get it. I took the first half of the second step. I didn't understand that my entire life is unmanageable because my mom managed it. I didn't mention She picked out the guy that I married. She planned my wedding from New Jersey. Thank God, because I didn't know what I was doing. And she did a great job. So I wasn't looking for anybody to manage my life. And that did not turn out so well for me. At 30 years sober, we went into COVID and I got exposed to a lot of different meetings, a lot of different formats. And I got exposed to a format that basically focused on alcoholism, ego, and self. And trust you, up to this point, outside of me commenting on someone else's ego, I didn't know I had one. Oh my God, I didn't know I had an ego. I lived everything based on what you thought of me, how much attention I got, how much approval I got, whether I was saying something that you could relate to. I'm not even looking at the camera to see if anybody's nodding or smiling because it doesn't matter. I asked God to speak for me at the meeting, before the meeting. So whether I do good or bad, you can have a conversation with God. But this has absolutely nothing to do with me being smart, me getting wise. This is about two men got together and God helped them write a book that is the exact outline for how not to drink. Yes, I used the big book and I sponsored a lot of women that never went back to drinking. What happened though was these women were getting jobs and moving away. They were getting married. They were having families. They were going back to school. They were doing all these amazing things. And my life wasn't changing all that much. Granted, from drinking from 10 to 28, my life changed a lot. For the first time, I had people in my life that weren't telling me to get lost and don't come back. I had people that were saying the opposite. Unless we expressly disinvite you, you're invited to everything in AA. And yeah, for the first 20 years, I never didn't have a commitment. I sponsored because I was told that that was part of what you had to do. I did service because I was told that was part of what you had to do. I loved going to meetings because I never felt worse after a meeting. Didn't matter how I came in, I never felt worse. And these women that had sponsored me, all of them had died or they moved far away. And I didn't know until that time that I was in compliance. I was just mimicking what they were doing. And I don't put that down because I was getting the results of having worked the 12 steps. I had a personality change sufficient that the compulsion to drink was removed. And it has never come back in 34 years. I have found it necessary to take a drink in those 34 years. I just never got close to taking one because I learned early on, because of my past experience, that a drink was not going to make anything better. I didn't even buy the, I want to get out of the feeling right now because I knew what was coming after. And it was that I was going to feel like crap about myself. I was going to be in shame. And I was yet again going to be looking for you to put me back together because I didn't see anything inside and I didn't give God a big enough chance to rely on. I was relying on human beings. So at 30 years sober, I got introduced to this format of alcoholism, ego, and self. And I had it explained to me by a woman in Germany who was my sponsor for 4 years. And I worked the steps again with her that, amount of time that I have in AA is not equity. I don't get to rest on my laurels ever. It will never matter how long I'm sober. It's going to matter if I have quality in my sobriety. I never understood why you guys talked about a 24-hour-a-day program. I thought you were tricking me. 24 hours a day for the rest of my life. And I'm sleeping 8 of those. No, basically what you're saying to me is you can't handle more than 24 hours. So we're going to break it down really simple for you. And we've written it down in a book. And we have sponsors and we have meetings and we talk about this stuff at coffee tables. So at 30 years sober, I had to ask my sister, what is my devastating weakness? And I wasn't a big proponent of the 12 and 12 when I was new because my first boyfriend told me it was an arrogant man that wanted only his name on a book. So don't put too much credence into it. Later on, I did. But it was funny because she said it's on the first page, first step. And I said, oh, well, what is my devastating weakness? She said, Jane, it's your thinking. You have a warped mind. You're taking your problem to the problem and you think you're going to come out with a solution. And let's review why everybody thinks that you run this. And I did. I had a really great program as long as I was doing it this way. I did it tonight too. I get down on my knees in the bathroom and I ask God to speak through me. And he does. And during the moment of silence in a live meeting, I ask God, if you want me to share on whatever the topic is, please let me know and do the share for me. So all you guys ever saw from me was me having asked God to do it, and then God did. But I was also that person that when I went home, I screamed at my kid, and I looked for the shortcuts through life, and I was a gossip, and I was many things that I didn't look for in a friend. And it was always proposed to me, whatever you want in your life, become that. Don't go looking for someone to be it so you can be like them. Become what it is that you want to attract into your life. So about 4 years ago, I was attracting people into my life that finally, this whole thing about time, which I was so petrified to tell people where I lived, that I wasn't doing it exactly the way they were. And this other group was stoked that at 30 years sober, I found a different way to live. And the whole thing is just Alcoholics Anonymous. The whole thing is the magic that is AA, that is the 12 steps, that is application, that is treating my alcoholism in the day that I'm in every single day, that I don't get to stay clean on yesterday's shower, that I have to re-up every single day I take the first 3 steps. My feet don't hit the floor without me greeting God into my life, without me saying that I surrender. I have come up with, in sobriety, every single thing I could think of not to have to do it the way it's outlined in the book. Always looking for, I would say, I want the easier, softer way. I took the hard road because I have a cement head. And the first thing I did, they taught me two-way prayer, which is something they did in the Oxford group. And I'm not going to go into it. You can go to twowayprayer.org if you want to know about it. But you get to ask God questions on your heart, and somehow he answers. And of course, I'm so self-centered. The first thing I asked was, why did I have to go through 30 years of, not really grasping how much joy and love and growth and spirit and ease and comfort, and did I say joy already? Contentment that there was available to me in this program. I came here and didn't drink, and I pretty much didn't look beyond that. And at 30 years sober, I didn't want what I had. I knew that nobody else wanted what I had. And it was for about 5 years. Something inside me knew better than to sponsor anybody. I didn't speak at meetings. I didn't leave meetings because I was never going to let anybody say I left AA. So, oh, dang, I got a lot of time. So, this is the what happened second part. I love this woman that was my sponsor. Her name is Texas. And she asked me what my relationship was like with God. And I said, what? I have no idea what you're talking about. What do you mean my relationship? I have God. I pray. She said, no. What's your relationship? How do you make how do you make friends with somebody? You talk to them. You ask them questions. So that's what, I was doing a two-way prayer. So I was, asking God, why did you do this to me? Why? And his answer was, because I know that you will find humility somewhere, and you will tell a group of people, 150 people right now, that it took you the first 30 years for God to get you ready for you to say, this is how you do it. And for the last 4 years, I've been talking to people about exactly what most of you are probably doing and what a lot of people weren't doing that had a lot of time. And it talks about in the back of AA Comes of Age. The Amazing Recuperative Powers of the Ego. And it talks about the bleeding deacon. And I had both of those. The ego backs up self. And if I don't know very many pages to quote, but what was pointed out to me was on page 64, before resentment is the #1 offender. I somehow magically skipped that paragraph. And it says, being convinced that self in common manifestations is what had defeated me. Self has defeated me. I relied on self. Doesn't self have to get up? Doesn't self have to go to work? And it's like, no, honey, you're talking to the wrong self. Self had defeated me, so I had to find a power upon which I could live. So there you go. If you didn't take the second step, I was kind of operating on the Bush League pinch hitter God. And the first year that I had this information, oh my God, did I go back into self-centered fear big time. I think I started every share with, and I have 30 years. Somehow I thought that, and until they could get to me and say, we don't give a shit how long you've been sober. We just want to hear about what you did today to stay sober. I'm like, oh, are you guys slow? And they're like, no. Can you just describe what you did today? So I will explain to you what my routine is. And my pops is on here tonight. And I don't have my bracelet on because I gave it to a newcomer. But I wear a 10-step bracelet. And it talks about, it says 10 on one side. And it says the first 5 seconds are golden on the other. And it talks about, I have 5 seconds when a thought comes in my mind. I can't stop thoughts from coming in my mind. This is I call it the warperator. This thing just doesn't stop. If you think I talk fast and talk a lot, this thing is going 10 times faster. And only with God can I actually, and meditation, can I actually slow down. I don't think I heard anyone talk about meditation for 30 years. But anyway, so I'm developing this relationship with God. And God has basically said to me, you are going to go on and take your experience, no matter how far down the scale we have gone. I know they're talking about drinking, but we'll see how our benefit can benefit others. I have had I think the first time, and I was shaking and crying for myself, because you were all going to hate me and say that I flunked AA and the AA police were going to come and kick me out. A guy with 37 years sober told me that he was sitting in a parking lot with a picture of his 3 sons in a church, and he had a razor blade in his wrist because he didn't know you could come to AA and say, I fell off the beam. Can you help me get back on? And as soon as he heard me say it, he knew he didn't have to die. And I decided right then and there that this program is no longer about me. And I picked out a couple things that are just my go-tos, aside from the steps. On page 417, it says nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. And it tells me in the 4th step that I'm in the world to play the role God assigns, not the one that Jane makes up, not the pictures I have in my head of my fame and fortune and all of your adoration and, whatever pictures I had in my head. Why would I bother if I'm in the world to play the role God assigns? I think the first time I started to understand that, I thought, now, forget the fact that, God made me, God's in my heart, God is in every tree, the wind, the air, what I breathe, everything. It's like, if you don't think God is all powerful, jump up in the air and stay there. There's your first higher power. You can't, gravity. So I started talking to this higher power. And my sponsor also told me when we got to the 2nd step, because I got that, my entire life is unmanageable. I surrendered that I had any better idea of how to do this thing, and that relying on self had gotten me a front row center seat, sober, to what it looks like when you rely just on yourself. I was a badass in front of you guys. I started riding a Harley when I was 40 years old. So I was sober all my 30s, all my 40s, all my 50s. I'm in my 60s. And I decided to become a biker. And I figured that'd make me seem tough. Then I started getting tattoos. Then I started swearing a lot. I already hang out with all the guys. And I just try to create all these false characters that aren't even me. So why don't I have like a posse of friends? What happened to me at 22 years sober is I started having spine surgeries. So I had to resign from that, big important job that I had. My son had grown up and moved out. And when you have spine surgery, you're flat on your back. You're not going to meetings. So my big meeting schedule was gone. So all my disciplines that I did have in place wiped out, almost seemingly to me, all at once. And here I am laying flat on my back, and this thing just won't shut up. And I can't figure out for the life of me, why is this tormenting me? So I live alone. I've been single all my sobriety. I'd have to turn the TV on first thing in the morning just so I could hear noise. I would go days without hearing another human voice. And, when we went to Zoom and I started going to Zoom meetings, man, I went on fire again for aid like you would not believe. When I realized that I could have a portable God, when I realized that I had a portable program, when I realized that these steps, I am not the constitutionally incapable person, that there is an unsuspected inner resource in me, just like in every one of you. I have no more God in me than you have in you. And if I choose not to be judgmental, which is, in my opinion, observation without love is judgment. Who am I to judge? God put me on the world to be something, not to do stuff. He put me here to be. He put me here to be loving, to be kind, to be the hand that is outreach to the woman that's coming behind me. Because there is no greater gift than seeing that light go on in somebody's dead eyes that they think their life is over. And I sponsor women that weren't alive when I got sober. And I look at them, and if I could play any part of a small role in them not taking as long as I took to get to the solution, and the solution is spiritual. And first, you do have to put the plug in the jug. And those 12 steps are in order for a reason. And we have sponsors for a reason. And we go to lots of meetings, especially book studies, for a reason. This is a textbook on my life. I find myself on every page of that book. By page 103, we've stopped working the steps. Everyone's uproar about the chapter to the wives, to the employers, the family afterward and vision for you are delightful. But the steps are actually done. Page 104, we start into, I think, the family afterward. And I don't tell you that, to sound smart or say there's a different way to do AA. I just don't get all lit up about pronouns. And I understand, my sister is not heterosexual. And I do understand that everybody wants to be understood as they are. So, I don't mean to sound cold. I never got hung up on the word God or he or, whatever. I just want to be someone who doesn't have to die an alcoholic death. And I don't want to die an alcoholic death sober. And the way I was going, it was looking like that. And my mom lives in Georgia. My mom has alcoholic dementia. Half her hippocampus is gone because she chose to live her life inebriated, intoxicated, blacked out. But my mom wasn't like me. My mom was successful. My mom was married to my third father for 42 years. My mom got all the things she didn't have when she was little. My mom had to watch her father beat the shit out of her mom every day. She was an only child. She made a decision that she was not going to grow up and depend on a man. So that's what I saw. I could blame my mom here to the cows come home. My mom did the best she could do with the parents that she had. I didn't live in her shoes. And she gave me a damn fine life. She made a really good effort, the best she could. And that was material things. And if I've learned nothing else, the solution for me is spiritual. It'll never be something that I have. Nothing that I have belongs to me. My house does not belong to me. My health does not belong to me. My ability to stay sober does not belong to me. That belongs to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, and all of you. You guys can get and stay sober without me, but I can't get and stay sober without you. And if I can't afford to get lulled back to sleep, to believe that I've been doing this for such a long time, that I put in my time. This is a lifelong journey, and I'm hella grateful for that. Because if they told me that I had to do this perfectly, or I had to do it linearly, or I had to do it exactly like you did, or I had to identify with your God, or I had to have the same experiences as you, or I had to be traumatized the way you were, I wouldn't have made it here. I had to have my own journey. I don't get to make up a journey for anybody else. I love sponsorship today. I sponsor a lot of women because I understand. I will give them the rudimentary ways that I was taught to do things and the way I do things now. And then I help them forge their own journey, their own path. I don't judge. Nobody has to do it my way. It's not my way or the highway. And I used to be that way. So I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is what I'm like now. I'm not even the same person that I was a year ago. But 4 years ago, I was in a world of hurt. Didn't think of drinking. Didn't have any experience with drugs. I just went back to that victim blame mentality and was on the hamster wheel. Couldn't get from my head to my heart, and my life depended on it. And then I got in an argument with my son, and my son has never talked back to me. And he had to go to Al-Anon and a therapist to be able to say to me, I'm not going to be your whipping post anymore when you get angry, when I'm not the person who made you angry. And if you keep talking to me the way that you do, I'm going to stop answering the phone. Who knows why? What thing hits you when it hits you? I heard him. Took me a little while. Took me a lot of, not a lot. Took me some reflection. Took me some conversations with God. I usually have to write stuff down because left up in my head, I have an eraser brain. I'll forget something in 5 minutes. I knew that it wasn't going to be good enough to apologize. I knew that without God's help, I wasn't going to be able to change. I called my son back, and in tears, I thanked him. I thanked him for being brave enough to be honest with me. I told him that I couldn't promise him that I would never raise my voice again, because I had found out about myself in doing that inventory that inbred in me in alcoholism is a liar, cheat, and a thief. And that is something that I have to stay ahead of. And if I were to promise you or anybody else, especially my son, that I would never lie to him again, yell at him again, I'd be lying. I have proven to myself that when I'm backed into a corner, I'm getting better. My go-to is go to God. And that first 5 seconds is golden on that 10-step bracelet means that I have 5 seconds to go to God or to go to me. I have a lot of experience going to me. And I'll be honest with you, like I'd lie to my own people. Those 5 seconds, I got to tell you, sometimes it is a chore to make a decision because sometimes I just want to curl up in a ball with self-pity, put on my self-pity, pity me music, put my pity me outfit on and have a good old cry. It just doesn't work so much anymore when you have a working relationship with God. God wants me to be happy, joyous, and free. I'm not that all the time, but I don't think the way that I used to. And I don't have any part in making that happen. I'd love to stand here and tell you, here's what you need to do. Here's what I did. And I have all the answers. I know less today than I knew yesterday. And I'm grateful for that. I know that I have smart feet. My feet tell me that I have to be with you. My feet tell me, you guys are the last house. You're the shack in the back of the last house on the last block in the last neighborhood. If there was another way to do this and have a modicum of peace and tranquility in my life, I would have found it. I was the self-help book queen. I'd read the front cover and the back page. I'd get the first paragraph in, and if the answer wasn't there, that book went up on the shelf. It isn't the same. It isn't the same with this book. This book is a manual on how to live. This is something that I have to study for the rest of my life. That book holds the secrets to. When my first sponsor told me that the answer to all my problems was in that book, I knew she was insane. Not possible. I can tell you today, the answer to every problem I have in this world is in that book. I have earned my seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. Earn your seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. I encourage you. Don't waste time here. We get to have fun here, but this is a life and death proposition. And you don't have to spend 3 decades in defiance of there has to be an easier way. When it says abandon yourself to God as you understand God, do the trust fall. The net is there. The net is always there, even if you can't see it, even if you think you're the one that's not going to get it. Everyone that logged in and is here participating in their own sobriety knows the net is there. I have jumped, and I've never hit my ass and not had some place to go and someone to talk to. You don't have to like everybody in AA, but there's this thing called love. I love the God in you, and the God in me sees the God in you. I finally know that I am not God, but that God resides inside me. And this beautiful gift is available to all of us if only we reach out our hand and ask somebody for help. Thank you for participating in my sobriety. And this was just genuinely a true joy to be here with you tonight.